This is Krish Subramanian from Rishi.Research. We are here at the Talk Kubernetes event on the sidelines of KubeCon. I am with Sheng from Rancher Labs. I know Sheng for quite a bit of time now, since this cloud.com days. It's good to have him back in the show, and we're going to have some interesting conversations regarding Kubernetes, regarding Rancher. Sheng, can you introduce yourself and talk about Rancher Labs?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Sheng Liang. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Rancher Labs. Rancher Labs is one of the startup companies in the Kubernetes ecosystem. We've been in business for 4 years. Pretty much grew up with Kubernetes. We provide one of the most popular container management platforms that help enterprise organizations run Kubernetes in production.
Awesome. So we are here in Seattle because of KubeCon happening here in the backyard. So can we talk a little bit about your expectations coming into this conference and what do you expect to get out of this conference?
Yeah, I know. Kubernetes seemed to be really hitting the mainstream. I was because the first Kubernetes conference, KubeCon, I attended was 2015, and I think it barely had a couple hundred people, and all of them were developers. They really weren't any real users, and we were just kind of mostly talking about the technical potential and potential use cases, and I was expecting there'd be more users. Indeed run into just so many enterprise customers, so many internet companies. But the other part that's slightly surprising to me was there's a lot of passion about Kubernetes technology and about what's going to come next. And I know within the community there was a bit of a saying that said Kubernetes is very mature now. It's kind of a little boring, and I don't think that's the case, because we actually struggle with the excitement of deploying Kubernetes and using Kubernetes every day. So I'm very excited that at this conference I see a lot of architects and practitioners that they're just very excited about what's going to come next.
Awesome. So that brings us to the topic of Rancher. There are many platforms in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So what makes Rancher different and unique compared to others?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think we always kind of stayed one step ahead of where the market is going, because we're, as a startup, we had the luxury of starting from scratch, not having an existing business to defend or to grow. And the other thing is we took an extremely focused customer-driven approach, because in this space you can really get carried away with technology. Just technologies always land on your lap every day. There's something new happening every day, and you could invent things yourself. So a lot of times it's easy to lose touch with what the users and customers need. So just give you an example, like early days we did really well just installing Kubernetes, managing Kubernetes, operating Kubernetes. These things are still challenging, but really not nearly as challenging as before. And I think Rancher is still probably the only major Kubernetes platform on the market today that manage not just Kubernetes you operate yourself, but also Kubernetes that are managed, Kubernetes clusters that are managed by the cloud, like GKE, like EKS, like AKS, like the DigitalOcean Kubernetes service they just formally announced today. We really believe that that's the future, because we're really excited.
A more hybrid approach to Kubernetes than we'll probably manage part of it with the Rancher's own Kubernetes distribution, and then take advantage of all these Kubernetes as a service offerings.
Exactly. So I think the key, the real potential of Kubernetes, it elevates infrastructure. Kubernetes containers and Kubernetes fit somewhere between the application and infrastructure, right? Like for traditional infrastructure guys like AWS and VMware, they look at it as an application workload. But if you're deploying a web application, big data application, Kubernetes is the infrastructure. So I tend to really look at Kubernetes more like infrastructure, because but it's really quite different from any kind of infrastructure before. Before infrastructure systems are very specific to the provider that offer it. AWS GCP, although both are virtual machine based, but they're really quite different. And Azure, they're quite different image formats, different API, different management experience, different end user experience. vSphere, it's yet another different type of infrastructure. It's more or less the same flavor of technology, but that's why there's actually a lot of value bringing vSphere into AWS, because now you at least have the same experience on both sides. But the vSphere experience is not really the same as the EC2 experience. But Kubernetes is very different. Like Kubernetes is very different in that regard from traditional virtualization-based infrastructure, because it's really the same. Amazon Kubernetes, Google Kubernetes, Azure Kubernetes, DigitalOcean Kubernetes, VMware Kubernetes. There's really no difference, and it really opens up a lot of value.
To which we are
exactly,
talking,
and it just allows us to. So Rancher's mission is less about that we implement Kubernetes for you, although we still do that, but that's actually becoming a lesser important part of our business. Our main focus is just how to help our users and enterprise customers take advantage of this new form of universally available infrastructure. It's really exciting.
So can you think of Rancher as providing the user experience to Kubernetes?
Yeah, exactly.
Being a Kubernetes distro.
We want to drive consumption. We want to drive adoption. I think, as successful as Kubernetes has been, it's still got a long way to go. I think, the best, talking to our customers, it's very clear they've only containerized a very small percentage of their total workload. And if you think the first step they get to Docker, then Kubernetes is yet another barrier they have to cross, right? So we really have a long way to go before Kubernetes could achieve the ubiquity of, I said, Kubernetes as infrastructure. Then let's just use two other things as comparable. I think it'll take some time for Kubernetes to reach the ubiquity of something like vSphere or AWS or EC2. I think it'll take a while, and we want to make it happen. So say user experience, that's a great way to capture it. But I want to make sure everyone understands user experience is more than just like, because some people think about user experience, it's like a UI, right?
UI, no,
but it's more than. I mean, you could think of like GitHub is a user experience on top of
exactly.
Git in that sense, right? Or Dropbox is a user experience, say, on top of S3, right? But like some of the things that Rancher does, starting from authentication, centralized authentication, wherever you get your Kubernetes cluster, you enforce uniform policies, governance policies, security policies, create a really nice workload deployment experience, right? Create a very good certified catalog, right? With all these security and availability add-ons, third-party integrations, integrated monitoring, or integrate with leading monitoring solutions like Sysdig and Datadog on the market. I mean, it's basically the sort of stuff that an IT organization or a DevOps team would have to go through it themselves if they wanted to just bring the vanilla Kubernetes open source technology in-house. Because technology is never, like, Kubernetes is great technology, so is Docker, so is Prometheus. But these things are never alone to solve your whole business needs. So organizations typically have to invest a lot of effort to integrate these technologies to make it really work. With Rancher, they don't have to do that anymore. It's open source, so we're seeing massive adoption.
So the difference I could think of is like if Kubernetes is the kernel, Rancher is the Linux distribution.
That's a good way to think about it. You could think about it. Again, you have to be careful with the analogies. But let's just say you could think of Kubernetes as Kubernetes. You think about Kubernetes as a kernel, or you could think about Kubernetes as the hypervisor. But Rancher could be like a cloud service, right? Either way you look at it, so it's these are not exact analogies, but the important thing to remember is technology is a necessary enabler. But I always try to convince the technologists in our space to listen to the users a lot more. They actually have more than what they consume.
True.
And to the extent we can actually create a good experience, like you were saying, that's actually going to be what it takes to make Kubernetes really successful.
Yeah. So thinking of it, like I'm seeing an emergence of continuum of services, like from virtual machines to containers to serverless functions. So like, and I am also seeing a trend where the containers to serverless functions happens on top of Kubernetes. Knative is one example of that. So what are your thoughts on that trend that is sort of evolving in the community, as well as what will be Rancher's position with regards to serverless and other offerings out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great observation. I think this trend is inevitable. People just don't want to worry about. People want to worry about less and less details, and I think it's a very good role for Kubernetes to play as the common infrastructure underpinning for all these serverless and function as a service frameworks, right? And the serverless space is very exciting. It's relatively early. Some people say it's so early that it doesn't really have a whole lot of real adoption outside of, say, Lambda, which I think I kind of have to agree to some extent.
Yes,
there's also some confusion about what is serverless. Do you mean serverless by saying serverless? Do you mean things like serverless containers, like containers without clusters, or you mean function as a service?
Yeah,
right?
Confusion is always.
I think both are, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But
that is why I sort of prefer to think of it as a continuum of services from containers to functions than any specific terminology.
I think so. So I think at this point we're probably a little closer to the serverless container instance space, that clusterless containers, than all the way to functions. I think that's probably even that's an even more revolutionary programming model. That's a little bit further ahead in the future, but we're primarily driven by user adoption, right? And then user adoption comes naturally. I think one of the reasons why a service like Lambda, a serverless service like Lambda really takes off in AWS is because of the richness of the AWS platform itself. That's and the adoption of the Amazon platform, AWS platform itself. I think some of this also has to happen. I think as Kubernetes adoption and the richness of Kubernetes, everything that happens on top of Kubernetes really achieves the next level, then I think there will be a lot of demand to start tying a lot of these solutions, tying a lot of these services that run on Kubernetes together, then functions will be a very good way to tie it. So I think right now it's probably a little early. I would say
that's a very good way to look at it.
I like to see it happen, but we're aggressively monitoring this space. We're also working on some technologies primarily around serverless container instances. I think that these things are one step closer to reality than full scale functions. But I'm very excited about all these technologies.
Awesome. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what kind of use cases you are seeing with your customers, probably across multiple verticals. When I was in the Rancher Analyst Day, I heard some of the use cases myself. So that was pretty interesting. But for my viewers, I would love to hear from you. What are the use cases you are seeing, and why they think they pick Rancher over some of the competitors out there? This I heard myself over there in the session, but I would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. So I like to talk about some of the more common use cases, and also talk about one use case that's a bit unusual. I thought it was kind of just interesting because we actually today made an announcement about it. So I would say the great thing about Kubernetes and containers is it is very mainstream. If you look at Rancher customers, we don't have an obvious vertical. Like it goes from financial services to technology to government to retail to manufacturing to service providers. So they seem to be all over the place because pretty much all of these guys have the need, as long as you have a need to write software, you have a need to deploy software quickly and to run the software reliably and securely. All of these guys see the need for Kubernetes and containers. So typically adoption happens with Rancher mostly from the DevOps team in a more organic manner. Like we do wing some, enterprise-wide container as a service bake-offs or platforms, but that's actually still relatively uncommon. So that the new private cloud, that's still relatively uncommon. A vast majority of tens of thousands of active Rancher open source users tend to be just small DevOps teams, maybe in a large organization, and they just really have very pragmatic problems to solve, which is how to deploy their application more quickly and less error prone, and these guys are they really can't afford to invest a whole lot of engineering on their side, right, to digest all that underlying technologies like Kubernetes and Istio and Knative, and so Rancher put them together in a nice, simple, nice to consume package. So that was I would say the key use case. Typically happens in the cloud, although I'd say amongst our paying customers, not surprisingly, the on-premise ratio is also, I think, quite sizable, like around 20-30%. So like primarily on vSphere. So it's really, if you think about it, AWS, Azure, vSphere, GCP, those kind of deployments that are primarily around expediting software delivery and development. We don't tend to see a whole lot of microservices yet. So some of the surprise to me and to a lot of people. But then you think harder, it's not a bad thing, because then we're not waiting for microservice movement to happen, right? So then finally I'm going to talk about a more interesting use case that we just kind of announced. We made an announcement this morning because a lot of people were talking about it. So ARM and Rancher came together, driven by some customers to start driving the use of Kubernetes on the edge. So I tell you exactly what that means. So what's going on is, if you kind of look at IoT and edge nodes, there are these very, very small footprint things like a thermostat or something. Those things you can't really fit a classic operating system, let alone Kubernetes on these. So that's out of our reach. But what tends to happen is nowadays they have, think about a whole building. They actually have a edge node that is used to be collecting all the sensory data, temperature, air quality, and then they kind of make some decisions, and they actually send some of that data up to. So there's usually there's effectively an aggregation point for a lot of IoT nodes. So that's actually turned out to be a good spot where people are interested in actually deploying Kubernetes.
So are you deploying a full version of Kubernetes, or do you have a stripped down version for these use cases?
A great question. So we looked at these nodes, and they're like 4 gigabyte, 8 gigabyte, right? And we actually kind of started with initially I questioned, why do you need Kubernetes at all? Why not just do like a Linux? Just do RPM, right? But it turned out they're actually deploying fairly sophisticated services. I mean, they're deploying some analytics services. So things are getting upgraded. So they actually want the ability to, it's not quite microservices, but they're like handling dozens of components, right? So I can see they want service discovery. So they actually like a lot of this Kubernetes capabilities. So we started by deploying these single node Kubernetes clusters, and we immediately ran into the problem of footprint. So we've been actually on the path to optimizing it ever since. Today, our system still struggles on majority of 4 gigabyte nodes. 8 gigabyte is really what it minimally takes, but our goal is to reduce, to have basically a subset of sort of minimal Kubernetes, sort of like what we did with Rancher OS, like try to slim it down, right? And so that the whole thing, like Linux, Docker, it will be Linux containerd and the small Kubernetes, and including some kind of a config store like etcd. I'm not sure we can afford to use etcd, but it will be something very small that can all fit under a gigabyte of memory.
That is interesting.
Then the rest could be used really for applications. So,
in fact, I was expecting OpenStack community to do something like this for edge use cases. They instead wanted to go with what they have and then They sort of missed that opportunity. I think this is good. Like this is definitely interesting.
Yeah, I hope I have more to tell you in a few months. We're still in that project now.
After a few months to talk about it. This sort of brings us to the next question that is coming up often in the community. Like, this is more on the business side. There is consolidation happening in the industry. Red Hat got gobbled up by IBM. VMware acquired Heptio. So, do you expect the consolidation to continue? And if this consolidation happens, or is there a place for smaller players to still be competitive in this market?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think this is there are different kinds of consolidations. There's consolidation that happens in a very mature market, right, where a market or its growth cannot sustain a certain number of players, so consolidation helps. So you see a lot of that. But Kubernetes is actually not quite like that. Kubernetes acquisitions are more like big companies waking up to this new, and this is the sort of thing we've been, shouting all along. Like I really think it is a matter of time before, the first wave was the cloud provider, then the next wave is the IT provider, right? And I think as the market happens, you expect stuff like that. And at this point, I would say, still my biggest concern is we actually had no shortage of vendor excitement for Kubernetes right now, community excitement. But the real adoption isn't quite there yet to the same extent as AWS or vSphere in its ESX, in the old days. And I think the situation is already much better than OpenStack. But still, I think right now it benefits us to have more people that come to the market, and smaller players, like we only have 100+ people, certainly much smaller than some of these big players who we respect tremendously. But what I see is the number one, the customer needs are still not getting met, especially from a point of view of a pure play sort of new computing stack kind of perspective, rather than trying to leverage Kubernetes to sell my existing service kind of perspective, because different people approach it different ways. So there's still plenty of opportunities for us to go after. We're not really constrained by the amount of opportunities, and our business is growing like by leaps and bounds. So I'm not really too worried about that.
Okay, awesome. So before we wind up, I would love to sort of hear your expectations about where Kubernetes should be going, especially as someone who is both consuming internally as well as taking care of customer needs. You fully understand some of the challenges with Kubernetes. Of course, user experience is a problem you are solving, but there are other challenges which Kubernetes has to tackle. So as a community, let's say if we meet again in the next KubeCon, where do you expect the community to go from here to next KubeCon?
Yeah, I think the community will be a lot more focused on the set of things that we primarily being focused on. I think if you think this whole industry, how it evolved, Kubernetes historically came from how Google ran infrastructure internally, right? And it turned out, it was very good at a lot of good technology, but generally you can't take something that works for Google and expect to replicate it into every organization, because they certainly don't have the same needs, and especially they don't have the same kind of personnel as Google SREs, right? So one thing, for example, I saw immediately was, instead of running very big Kubernetes clusters, a lot of people were running multiple smaller Kubernetes clusters. And with cloud infrastructure, in fact, there's not a lot of waste that goes into that practice, because you can size your cluster in almost at the exact size that you want. So that's how we got that's what got Rancher into managing more smaller Kubernetes clusters, but with more clusters as opposed to just one. So so things like that, I think federation. I think we never seem to really got it right as an organization. It's still kind of work in progress, right? And application catalog like Helm, Helm 3. I think there should be a lot more evolution. But fundamentally, though, I see people these days. People generally care about our customers when all said and done. They primarily, because I think Kubernetes already did scale pretty well. So I don't see a whole lot of complaint around that. Primarily around two things: reliability, but not reliability of the cluster, but how Kubernetes really help my application to be more reliable. So there's just a little bit more than that. I think it takes a little bit more learning, education. It's like the old days. Amazon had to educate people. You understand this availability zone. You can't assume a data center. So same kind of stuff is really going on, right? Like for example, Kubernetes. Is the cluster really meant to span availability zone? I think both Amazon and Google are actually kind of pushing that way, but I also see hesitation from some customers doing that. So there's no consensus, right? What's the right thing to be done? So we're right in the middle of that. So anyway, so like strong reliability, and then the other area is security. Security is, I've never seen security issues being brought up so front and center. And it's not just the security of the cluster itself, but how do you really make sure applications are deployed in a secure way? Everything is configured correctly, so that you're using secrets properly, and you're configuring your secrets properly, and nothing is really getting leaked. So we're seeing more and more of that kind of stuff. I really see in the next 12 months, I think all of these will be areas of rapid development.
Awesome. So in an interview, if I don't finish with a controversial topic, probably that's not going to be very interesting. So let me ask you, do you expect Kubernetes to go the OpenStack way or the right way?
Oh no, I think OpenStack was despite some of the challenges, like we said, I think the only thing is it just didn't quite reach the adoption that we all hoped. But it was still successful in its own ways, and it's powering many public and private clouds. So I think Kubernetes, though, would do even better. At this point, I'm very hopeful that Kubernetes will become the computing platform of choice for the enterprise, for business, for the cloud, right? And it's, you could think about it as a cloud overlaid on top of your existing resources, right? And I think that's been our hope, our vision, and we're not quite there yet, but I think we're getting very close, and I fully expect us to get there. And with 8,000 people here, and I'm sure next year it'll be over 10,000, 15,000. This and with more and more end users, I think this will become reality.
Awesome. I think I totally agree with you. The other problem OpenStack had was they were competing with the infrastructure provider. Here, Kubernetes infrastructure providers want to add it as a layer on top of their cloud services. So
exactly.
I think Kubernetes has a lot more potential that way than the other OpenStack open source projects.
Exactly.
So yeah. Awesome,
All right.
Sheng, it was great conversation and good to hear from you. And I would love to circle back after a few months and hear about more about what you're doing in incubation and with your customers. Thanks for your time, and it was great chatting with you again.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.